Trailblazer, a woman whose life reads like the script of a Hollywood movie.
Miss Josephine Baker.
On the 28th of August 1963, over 200,000 people gathered in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial for the March on Washington. This crowd, filled with hope and optimism, would soon hear Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic "I Have a Dream" speech. But before he took to the stage, Josephine spoke to those assembled, the only woman to officially make an address. She would tell stories of the discrimination she faced as a black woman in America, and speak of the liberty that she was denied in her home country, but that she found in France.
This is the happiest day of my entire life.
Historian Benetta Jules Rosette was just 14 years old when the words of Josephine Baker spoke to her. Few recordings of her 20-minute speech remain, but Jules Rosette is determined that her words won't be lost to history.
In that country, I never feared. It was like a fairyland place. I could go to any restaurant I wanted to, and I didn't have to go to a colored toilet either. I had to tell you that it was nice. I wasn't afraid anymore. That speech had an impact because I grew up in Washington, D.C. during the period of segregation, and so I know what it was like.
At the rally, Baker was flanked by numerous movie stars of the time. She was no stranger to the silver screen herself. But her life as an entertainer was put on hold when World War II broke out. Working for the French resistance, Baker would use her celebrity to infiltrate embassy parties and gatherings and report any intelligence back to the Allies. Her bravery earned her several medals, which she wore with pride.
Pourquoi avez-vous accepté d'entrer dans les services secrets?
Pour défendre la France, mon idéal, qu'il est la vôtre, j'espère, la dignité humaine. J'ai des amours, mon pays Paris.
Baker would never attain the same level of recognition in the US as in her adopted France. But despite renouncing her citizenship, she would never give up the fight for racial equality.
Almost a century ago, Paris met Josephine Baker, a young woman from across the Atlantic who became a new kind of celebrity in a city that was hungry for American idols.
Josephine Baker was the girl who left St. Louis to come to Europe to find freedom.
Baker had fled segregation in Missouri and was enchanted with the freedom and acceptance she found in France. But there was racism here too, both in her roles on stage and in her daily life.
Madam Josephine.
Speaking to the BBC years later, she explained how she fought against it, adopting 12 children from around the world that she nicknamed her Rainbow Tribe.
These children represent an example of real brotherhood. They show to people that it is possible to live together if we so wish to.
Now?
One of her children says he never thought his mother was cool until he learnt Mick Jagger was a fan.
She was very protective, very close to us when she was there, because sometimes she was away. And she wanted for us a good education, so sometimes she could be a little bit strict when we were doing bad things.
Baker used her celebrity to campaign against racism and intolerance, and also to pass information for the French resistance during the Second World War. This is one of the greatest honours France can bestow, a seat in the resting place of its national heroes. Josephine Baker is the first black woman to be honoured here, a member of France's wartime resistance movement and a lifelong campaigner against racism. Tonight, almost a century after she performed there, Josephine Baker will be honoured at the Bal Blomet nightclub in Paris with a tribute show.
I'm not trying to be Josephine. I cannot be Josephine. She's too... it's enormous. She's too big for me.
Idealist and idol, singer and spy. Her trademark song, J'ai deux amours, a love song to Paris, the city that claimed her and has never let her go. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
Josephine Baker's love affair with her adopted homeland, France, was a lot less complicated than her relationship with the country of her birth, the United States. Her adopted son, Jarry Bouillon-Baker, works at the New York restaurant named after her. He's delighted that his mother will now be honoured with a plaque in Paris's Pantheon.
Je pense qu'elle est enfin reconnue mondialement. Elle a tout fait depuis être artiste, mais être dans la guerre aussi. Et puis ensuite lutter contre le racisme, parce qu'elle était noire sûrement. C'est pour ça qu'elle est partie en Europe et puis elle est restée là-bas finalement. Elle se sentait beaucoup plus libre là-bas qu'ici.
In the early 1920s, Josephine Baker came to New York City and performed with the Chocolate Dandies at the Cotton Club in Harlem. Although she never achieved the same level of fame in the US as in France, Harlem historian Dr. John Manan believes she played a key role in the cultural and civil rights movement known as the Harlem Renaissance. There's no plaque to her here at the old site of the Cotton Club, but there's a lot of history.
I think she is an icon in the civil rights movement, as someone who used their position to further the cause of African American liberation and equality. She came in 1963 for the March on Washington, and to be one of the people who had made it and was recognized throughout the world made African Americans feel we have people all over the world.
The autumn leaves. Dr. Manan and jazz singer Terry Davis wished to pay tribute to Baker's legacy here in Harlem.
East of the sun, west of the moon, yeah.
A few blocks west of the old site of the Cotton Club, 17-year-old Kendall McDowell is on her way to a dance rehearsal with the Harlemettes.
People like Josephine Baker, they are trailblazers. Whenever we do the dance in A-Train, I try to put myself back when everybody's at the Cotton Club and moving and performing.
This school was founded in 1964 at the height of the civil rights movement by a contemporary of Baker, black opera singer Dorothy Maynor. The year before, Baker had told the crowd at the March on Washington that she'd always taken the rocky path and that she'd tried to smooth it out a little to make it easier for everyone else.
Josephine Baker represents bravery, freedom, and joy.
This is the breakout performance of the legend Josephine Baker.
She was dancing the Charleston. In France, nobody knew about this dance.
1920s Paris had never seen anything quite like it.
She's feeding into this whole idea of the exoticism of Africa that the French held.
She took racist cliches, she laughed at them, and then she used them for her own ends.
From this moment, Josephine Baker would be catapulted to fame to become the world's first black superstar.
Vous avez aimé la vie d'artiste des années folles?
Et je l'aime toujours.
Le plume, les strass.
On a de la chance, vous savez, nous autres, d'être sur la scène, de s'exprimer avec tant de bonheur.
In this special programme, Brian Boyen-Baker tells us what it was like to be the child of one of the most famous performers of the 20th century. She was also a war hero and a civil rights activist.
Nearly 50 years after her death, Josephine Baker is being honoured with a place in France's revered Pantheon, a monument reserved for celebrated French icons. She's the 6th woman and the first black woman to receive the honour.
When did you realise how famous your mother was?
When I was a kid, not really. I realized that she was famous when I was an adult and that she was courageous.
What did she tell you about her own childhood?
She was always speaking about the present and the future for us. She was thinking that we didn't have to know so much about her past.
Freda Josephine MacDonald est née le 3 juin 1906 à Saint-Louis, Missouri.
C'est moi. Ni noire, ni blanche, ni rouge. Tout ça mélangé, ça fait du café au lait.
We're doing our interview in the new Passy Theatre in Paris, where a show about Josephine Baker's early life is playing. Clarice Kaplan plays the young Josephine.
J'ai commencé à travailler très tôt chez les gens pour faire le ménage et nourrir la petite famille parce qu'on était pauvres.
Her mother was very hard on her. She went to work for white people who mistreated her, and the fact that she was mixed race was hard because white people thought she was too black and black people thought she was too white.
How did she learn to dance?
She didn't really learn. She was a dancer when she was a kid, in the street already, at home.
She invents a character where she knocks her knees together. She makes funny faces and goes cross-eyed. She was noticed in New York by a lady called Caroline Dudley. She'd been tasked by the director of Paris's Champs-Élysées Theatre to create a show that in 1925 became a massive hit. It was the Revue Nègre.
Extraordinaire, c'est la Revue Nègre.
Elle vient de Philadelphie. Avec la Revue Nègre, elle débarque à Cherbourg, un mois plus tard au Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. C'est le scandale.
People either loved it or hated it. It was done at a time when France was sort of ripe for an experience that they felt was perhaps primitive, but because of its primitiveness, pure.
This review had such success that Paris fell in love with my mother and proposed her to stay forever.
This was the first time a white man offered her his hand to help her step down from the train. It was the first time a white man opened a door for her and served her coffee.
They were welcomed as performers, and they could walk down the very street that led up to this theater and enter into the front door.
So at the age of 19, this young woman left behind a segregated America for a new, freer life in France. She soon became the toast of the town.
She was the muse of the Cubists. Picasso, they all wanted to paint her. Calder made a Josephine Baker sculpture. The big fashion designers wanted to dress her.
Even Beyoncé, in recent years, wore that banana skirt.
Not only Beyoncé, but also Rihanna, and also Cocteau before, and Man Ray, the photographer.
Why was she so fascinating?
I think that this kind of energy, generosity, and a way of being simple with a sexy body and a nice face, she had a charm, unique.
By the 1940s, as an established star, Josephine Baker embarked on her most daring adventure yet. She became a spy for the French resistance.
Et voici Joséphine, oui, le lieutenant Josephine Baker, qui rapporte d'une tournée en Égypte un chèque de 4,5 millions de francs destiné à la résistance.
When the Germans and the Nazis were invading France, she decided to cooperate with the resistance directly because she was feeling that France had given to her so much. She had to give back, to fight the racism and the anti-Semitism. So she decided to hide a lot of resistance in her castle and to become a kind of secret agent.
Comme c'est une star, dans les ambassades.
As she was a star, she had access to the embassies, where there were key people, and she was able to collect very important information for the intelligence.
Tout à fait importante pour le renseignement.
Mais surtout, je faisais de la résistance, parce que j'avais qu'une seule chose en tête, c'est-à-dire de aider la France de remontrer comme elle était avant et qu'elle avait pas perdu pendant le commencement de la guerre, mais c'était un petit moment de malheureux.
Not many French people signed up to the resistance right at the start of the war in 1939.
Were you there when she received France's highest medal, the Legion of Honor?
Yes, but I was 5 years old, so I was not really interested by that. So I asked to the General-in-Chief of the French army if I could go in his helicopter. That was more interesting for me.
Following the war in 1947, Josephine Baker married French orchestra leader Joe Boyan. They spent most of their time at their 15th century Château Les Milandes. She longed for children.
Afin de prouver au monde que les hommes peuvent vivre en paix, Josephine Baker, qui n'a jamais pu avoir d'enfants, décide d'adopter des orphelins de toute race et de toute religion.
J'ai eu cette idée parce que j'ai vu tellement d'incompréhension entre les êtres humains, les soi-disant adultes. Et j'étais sûre qu'avec de tout petits enfants innocents, ils pouvaient donner un exemple absolu de la fraternité mondiale.
The children were called the Rainbow Tribe, and they truly were rainbow. There were Asian children, there were children of African descent, there were French children. She raised them all together in this chateau called Les Milandes in the Dordogne, which is now a museum in her honor.
Vous avez 10 enfants?
Ben oui, non, 10 garçons et 2 filles.
12?
12, heureusement que les filles ne vous entendent pas.
How did you come to be adopted?
I am born when there was a war, let's say an independentist war between Algerian and French people. My parents, they were killed. After that, 6 months after that, she was singing for an orphanage, and she discovered me with other kids. I was smiling. Oh, she looked at me, and she saw that as well. I was born the same day and the same month as her, the 3rd of June. And she said, oh, this baby, it's a sign.
And what did she tell you later on about why she wanted to adopt you and your brothers and sisters?
First of all, she wanted a big family, like a big Italian mama. And by the way, on the Sunday evening, when she was there, she was doing her favorite plate, spaghetti bolognese way. We were all around the table. Even if she had biological children, she would have adopted because she wanted a big family with all colors.
And growing up in Les Milandes, the chateau, was it like a fairy tale?
It was like if you were in a permanent vacation colony. We were 12, always playing, and in a big castle. We enjoyed it. The only thing is that we are thinking we are not very normal family. And our mother is not very normal too, in a certain way.
You came from heaven, cause your face at 11. Matt, I know your word. You've made a...
By the 1950s, she was a worldwide performer, a war hero, and she lived in a castle. But her mission for equal rights and social justice was far from over.
In 1951, she went to the United States and she performed in several places. She refused to perform for segregated audiences.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed.
And in 1963, at the march where possibly the most famous speech in history was made, Josephine Baker also took to the podium.
She was the only woman to speak there, and she wore her French military uniform with all of her medals displayed, speaking for about 20 minutes.
And so she sends the double message. I stand beside you in the fight against segregation. And at the same time, I chose the French Republic because it was the French Republic that made me.
Josephine Baker continued her humanitarian work until the end of her life, and she never stopped touring.
Chaque jour, on a une ride de plus quand on nage comme moi, ou n'importe quoi de plus. Difficulté de bouger peut-être aussi pas si souple qu'avant, mais tout ça c'est tout naturel. J'ai de la chance de pouvoir d'être avec vous ce soir.
Elle a 69 ans, Josephine Baker revient à Paris, Paris dont elle disait « On ne peut pas finir sa carrière ailleurs ».
Puisque Paris c'est une femme, Paname, appelez donc Paris Paname,
The show she does in Paris is called Josephine. It's her last time on stage, exactly 50 years after her first appearance in 1925, and it's a triumph. The Rolling Stones are there, there's royalty, and international stars at the Bobino Theatre.
Les familles princières, les stars du monde entier sont présentes au théâtre de Bobino.
Quel effet ça fait de remonter sur la scène?
Bien, agréable, de pouvoir retrouver la famille. La famille pour moi c'est tout le monde et surtout le public qui m'a fait.
And at the end of her 14th performance, she's tired. She goes home, she takes a nap, and she dies.
Ils sont venus par milliers pour pleurer celle qui a enchanté leur jeunesse. Cette grande vieille dame disparue qui, 8 jours avant, les stupéfiait encore par son talent, par son courage. Cette petite fille d'esclave noire qui a conquis le monde par sa générosité de cœur, comme le rappelle dans son homélie le curé de la Madeleine.
What was it like when you saw all those people gather for her funeral when she died?
We were doing our school time in Monte Carlo, but we could see on TV a lot of people, a lot of the audience of my mother, and some military people, some politics, some artists.
How old were you?
17 years old.
People see her as this tremendous icon for stage performance. They see her as this representative of civil rights. They see her as this person who was willing to give her life for her adopted country of France. There are significant moments for each of those things. But I think Josephine would have wanted to be remembered most for being a good mother.
What do you think about your mother being honoured with a place in the Pantheon?
An honor, historical. It was the President Macron told me that she will stay as an example of the French Republican value.
In a world of divisions, where things are breaking apart, through her entrance into the Panthéon, she's bringing us together. And quite frankly, it feels good.
What do you think she would have said about being honoured with a place in the Pantheon?
She would have been surprised first. Then she would have maybe protest, saying, no, it's too much. But if General de Gaulle, President of France, would have said, Josephine, the nation and I have decided to put you, when you will be dead, in the Pantheon, she would have said, yes, my general, and she would have been very moved and proud.
She had 2 loves, 2 countries, and 1 incredible life. Her story's at the centre of the play Josephine B, which shows how a little girl from a poor family in Missouri went on to become an international star and a brave, independent woman.
Josephine Baker embodied freedom. She was provocative, beautiful, and funny.
She was also a woman of convictions. By 1940, the music hall star had conquered French audiences, but she wanted to help liberate them too.
She was an important part of the French resistance. She said it herself. I put microfilms in my sheet music or in my bra. My dressing room was open to those collecting intelligence.
Je faisais de la résistance parce que j'avais qu'une seule chose en tête, c'est-à-dire d'aider la France.
She was decorated for her efforts and took those medals all the way to Washington, where she joined another struggle, marching for civil rights in the footsteps of Martin Luther King. At the same time, her fight against racism continued back in France at her home in the Dordogne, surrounded by her family, made up of children adopted from different countries around the world.
Et à côté de Jean-Claude, qui est... Brahim. Il vient d'où? D'Algérie.
50 years later, Brahim remembers an unconventional but loving childhood. He was the 7th of Josephine Baker's 12 children, who she called her rainbow tribe.
C'est une famille multi-ethnique.
We were a multi-ethnic, multicultural family, but we were all brought up together in the same way to show the whole world that when you raise young children together, a truly universal sense of fraternity is possible. It's not just a utopian dream.
Committed to her own utopia and to freeing France, Josephine Baker's achievements are now carved in stone in the Pantheon.